Hi everybody, thanks for joining us today. So I am Lauren Long, the HR consultant at HPC, for those who haven't spoken to me already. Today we're going to be discussing the future of furlough following a recent update from the government and the key changes that you need to be aware of for those employees that you have furloughed. To what we'll be discussing today. So firstly, we'll have a look at flexible furlough options following the government announcement and what that could mean for you. The closure to new entrants, there's now been a time frame and some time deadlines being put in for this, so it's really important that you understand the detail around that. The reduction in the government funding percentage, so obviously they've also announced some scaling back to the current funding, and the agreement and consultation with the workforce that is required and also just sensible really, given that it seems it will all be eventually, hopefully, returning to business as usual. Okay, so if we start off going through the flexible furlough options that were announced, one of the options that we have now been given is to bring employees back on a part-time basis and furlough them for the remainder of their usual hours. So what this means in essence is if somebody usually works 40 hours a week and your business has maybe just gradually started to reopen, or you just want to ease people back into the workforce, or maybe just bring people back and see how it goes, you will be able to bring them back, say, for 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week. For that time, you'd pay them the normal pay for the hours that they have worked, and then you can furlough them for the rest of their hours. So if you bring them back for 20 hours, you pay them for the 20 hours, and then for the other 20 hours that would make up their usual contractual week, you can claim through the furlough scheme for those hours. There is a minimum claim period of 1 week for part-time hours. So it's clear that there's a change from obviously the initial 3-week period, but that still remains for people who are on full furlough. So that 3-week period for people who are furloughed for all of their hours still remains in place, but there's just a 1-week claim period for those who you bring them back on part-time hours, which hopefully will give you a lot of flexibility. You must obtain written agreement of the arrangement from the employee. So there's been quite a lot of changes to do with this, because at first we thought that we'd need to get the permission of people to be furloughed. Then there was a bit of debate saying that it wasn't completely necessary, but it's really important with the part-time workers, although we would recommend in any furlough circumstance that you've got the written consent, particularly if you are reducing the pay and you're not topping it up, then you would obviously need the consent in any event. However, for those who you are bringing back on a part-time basis, you absolutely must obtain their written agreement. So what we would recommend, obviously we can send you some template letters for this, what we'd recommend is that you make it very clear the hours that they're expected to work as part of their normal contractual week and what you'll be furloughing them for, just so that there's no ambiguity there. And this is effective from the 1st of July. So obviously these changes don't take place until the 1st of July. So June will just remain as it is. And then from the 1st of July, obviously you'll have the option to do the part-time furlough, and that will end on the 31st of October, because that's when the scheme ends altogether. So another update that we were given is the closure to new entrants. So from the 10th of June, is the last day to furlough new entrants, as they must be furloughed for a minimum period of 3 weeks. So basically, anybody who you've never furloughed in the business so far, so either those who you've just chose to keep in work, or those who you haven't furloughed for whatever reason, you will need to furlough them as of the 10th of June for it to be effective, because the scheme actually closes on the 30th of June to all new entrants, but they must be furloughed for a minimum period of 3 weeks. So therefore, while the scheme closes to new entrants on the 30th of June, the last actual day to furlough those new people will be for a minimum period of 3 weeks. And just a reminder that they would need to be furloughed for their full working week during June, because the new part-time changes doesn't come into effect until July. Another important point is that the 31st of July is the last day to submit claims for furlough prior to the 30th of June. So anybody that you have furloughed prior to the 30th of June, you've only got until the 31st of July to make sure that you submit your claims for those people. And I'm sure many businesses, given the situation that we're in at the moment, will have already been very proactive with the claims, but it's certainly a date to note just so that you don't miss that. So the next, probably most important thing, is the reduction in the amount of funding from the government, as I imagine this may potentially influence the way you handle people returning to work. And obviously it's important that you are very clear about what you will be required to pay and what the government will continue to pay for you. So from August, the government have announced that they will pay 80% of the wages still, and the employer contribution will just be the employer national insurance and pension contributions. From September, the government will only pay 70% of wages with a cap of £2,187.50, and the employer will be expected to contribute the other 10% of wages, which is £312.50 cap, plus the NI and the pension contributions. And from October, the government will only pay in the final month of the scheme 60% of wages with a £1,875 cap, and the employer will be expected to contribute the other 20% of the wages with a £625 cap, plus the NI and pension contributions. From the 1st of November, the employer's normal pay responsibilities will resume, and the government won't give any more funds and support, which hopefully is a bit of predictor of how the government see businesses hopefully being able to return to a bit of normal from the 1st of November if they don't believe that there's any sort of need to carry on the furlough scheme. However, it's important to note that about a quarter of the UK workforce are currently on furlough, which is costing the government obviously a substantial amount of money. So it could just be that they've decided that they're no longer able to financially fund the furlough scheme. Fred, just a note on that for any organisations who may think, okay, well, we can continue to furlough and support these wage supplements until October, but from November we don't know, for example, whether business will resume or whether we'll have enough work to bring everybody back. If you haven't already got a layoff clause in your contract, you would need to get the consent of your staff to continue to lay them off. If you have got a layoff clause in your contract, then you would be able to lay them off, and that could be either lay them off completely or for a period of time, or maybe introduce things like short time work, and where you ask them to come back on a part-time basis initially. But another thing to just note, anything after 4 weeks, the employee can claim that's a redundancy situation. So if you are going to have to lay people off still from November, you really need to start thinking about potential redundancies if you can't see past that date. Agreement and consultation with the workforce. So as I pointed out earlier, the furlough arrangements must be agreed in writing, so it's really important that you get that right. So if you are going to have somebody back 20 hours and they're going to be furloughed for the other 20, you need to make sure you've got that in writing. But as there's only a minimum 1 week period for that, it might be that you change that the week after. So again, as soon as that updates and there is any changes, then it's just important that you keep communicating these all in writing and ask the employee to sign up to this. So whereas we may have previously just recommended that if people are topping up the wages, you just send it out as sort of a notification, it's actually really important now that you get their agreement to this arrangement. So make sure that they sign something and bring it back. So with that in mind, I think if you can plan ahead, it'd be really useful, just so that you've got those arrangements agreed in writing before they actually start, so that you're not having any trouble with the start date. I think it's important, especially to obtain the agreement of flexibility from employees. So when you are writing to them to explain that this is a new situation, or this is how they're going to be returning to work, that you or if you're going to let them know that they will continue to be furloughed but on these new terms, I think it's really important at this stage that we try and get as much flexibility from employees. And I think the most important thing when thinking about that, and I guess the key way to get employees on board, is to be transparent as possible. So, in these letters that we're sending out, you can say, this is this is what we're planning in terms of the workforce returning, this is what we hope business will look like, however, this is what it could look like, or we're not sure what it'll look like, therefore we're asking you to be as flexible as possible, you know, to support the survival of the business by agreeing to be sort of changed from part-time working to full-time working at short notice if possible. I think another important thing, whether you are going to continue to furlough or whether you're just bringing people back, is to consult with them on the return to work and the reintroduction to the workplace. I don't think it should be underestimated, the fact that people will be very nervous and anxious about coming back to work, whether that's because they're worried about COVID. You know, you may get members of staff who COVID have directly affected, and will obviously be anxious about that. You'll also get people who have been off work and have been maybe used to this, or have got childcare arrangements that you need to consult with and consider, because I think it would, while there is no specific notice that you need to give to get employees back, I think it would be in your best interests as well as theirs to give them some sort of notice, rather than just expecting that people come back at very short notice, because I think arguably you could get some pushback. And again, I think it's right for you to set the culture from the start to make employees aware that you are mindful of what they're maybe thinking and the things that they're anxious about, things like public transport, you know, just generally how they're going to get to work and how they're going to operate. And also, I think maybe look at managing this in a similar way to those on long-term sickness. So if you've got somebody who's been off for 3 months, it's very unlikely that once they're signed back fit for work, that the GP would just suggest that they go back full-time and straight away. They usually, you know, recommended to be put on a phased return. So maybe that's something that you could consider, just because I think it's really important that you look to get the buy-in from the employees so that you get sort of less pushback. Consult and inform on the health and safety measures. As an employer, you have an obligation to provide a safe place to work. And there's actually some employment legislation that I can share with you later on that basically provides that if an employee doesn't feel that they're safe, the employer is providing a safe place to work, they can exercise a statutory right to refuse, which would then give them protection against any discrimination suffered. So, for example, if an employee says to you, you know, I'm not actually sure that you are providing a safe place for me to return to work, therefore I'm going to exercise my statutory right to refuse, and then you say, okay, that's fine, but we're going to take you off furlough, then arguably that could look like a punitive measure and they would be being discriminated against. We are actually sharing at the moment some COVID health and safety resource packs, so if anybody hasn't got one of those and would like one, if you just email help@highperformanceconsultancy.com and we can share that with you. And obviously for those who've got other health and safety providers and health and safety reps, you need to really be consulting with those now to get a strategy together to consult with your staff about the safe return to work. And consider individual circumstances. As I've just stated, people are going to have different levels of anxiety or concern about returning to work. I think there's probably a good blend of people who are either reluctant to return to work or nervous about returning to work, and others who are desperate to return to work. But obviously everyone's got individual circumstances relating to their well-being, their health, if they would be a shielded employee, and also people with childcare. So we need to be mindful not to discriminate against any people who fall within those groups. So it's really important that you have a good understanding of that. So it might be sensible in your circumstances that you speak with your employees and maybe do a bit of a survey to ask them what their concerns would be and whether they've got any issues about coming back, because then you may be able to determine, if you've done a survey and 10% of the workforce said they've got childcare arrangements that they're worried about and the other 90% said they're fine to come back to work, it might be that you decide to keep that 10% on furlough and bring the 90% back who are willing in the first instance. And manage reluctant returners. So like we say, you will get some people who are reluctant to return, some for good reason, but obviously, you know, as in every situation, we will always have a handful of people who maybe have not very genuine concerns and maybe just getting too used to the furlough life and not wanting to return, which obviously is inevitable in these circumstances. While I would encourage in the first instance you to, you know, use influence and persuasion to get people back to work and try and, from a cultural perspective, get their buy-in and make it clear that there's a safe place to return to work. There's obviously going to be those people who fall on the other side of that, who are just, you know, refuse, and they may not have shields and letters, they may not have childcare, so they may be exercising a reluctance to return. I think the key thing again is to just make sure that you can demonstrate that you've done a health and safety risk assessment and that you are very comfortable that you've created a safe place to work. You know, eventually for those who refuse to come to work, even though you've, you know, strongly demonstrated that A, there's a business need, and B, you've created that safe place, you could eventually lead down a disciplinary, treat it as a disciplinary issue, as a failure to follow reasonable management instruction. But again, we'd need to consider that on an individual and case-by-case basis based on the reasons that they provide for that. So if you do have anybody who you feel is pushing back and, you know, you haven't that reluctance for people to return to work, then if you just get in touch with us, we can advise on the individual cases. But I would just make sure that you don't sort of take a blanket approach and take the hard line with people coming back or not coming back, because like I say, you know, it's really important that we understand the individual circumstances around that so that we are not at risk of discriminating against anybody, because I do expect that following this there'll be a spike in claims against organisations who perhaps haven't managed this as well as they could have, although understandably it's been a very grey area from the government for a while. So we understand there's still quite a lot of ambiguity, so we just encourage you to get in touch with any queries that you have on those individuals. That's everything for me today in terms of the update. We have been told that we'll get a further update on the changes to the furlough scheme on the 12th of June, so a bit more detail around what to expect, because you know, in typical style, they announce the headlines of these changes and programs, but not really the nitty-gritty detail that we need. So hopefully post 12th of June we'll host another webinar with any more important updates. Dan, are there any questions that have come through?
Yeah, we've got 2 questions in the chat that I'll just read out now. If anyone does have any additional questions, please pop them in the chat now, and I'll get to those after we've gone through these initial 2. So the first question that Elaine has asked is, so we re-employed an employee who left on the 28th of February so that they could be furloughed. When employees have to start paying a percentage towards the salaries, will that be the time when we can say we can't furlough him anymore, as it would be costing the company money to do so?
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the case for a lot of people who are stuck in that kind of moral dilemma, who brought people back on the basis of the employee needs. So I think importantly, what we need to understand, Elaine, and we can pick up later about this, is how you communicated them their return. So hopefully when they have returned on the furlough basis, hopefully if they've previously resigned, you've made it clear that there would be an end date to their employment, or, you know, extension of their notice period until the furlough scheme ends. However, if that's not the case, then yeah, we could look at serving notice with them on the basis of the scheme ending. But again, we'd need to understand sort of the finer detail around that and follow a process. So if you just drop us an email, we can advise on that individual case.
Then the next question is, staff originally agreed via email to furlough back in March, not in writing. Will this do?
They agreed via email
rather than in writing.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's fine if you've still got the written agreement if it is via email. However, if you are going to make any changes, so if you're not able to pay any additional pay, or there's going to be any changes whatsoever, then yeah, I would make sure that you communicate to them again in writing and ask their consent to continue to be furloughed, and with any changes that you foresee.
Okay. The next question is from Jan. Just asking if there'll be any handouts or links to the details from this session.
Yeah, we can send you the recording of this with the slides, and we will also, when we get any further updates on the 12th of June, we'll share those with you as well.
And then we have another question, so I'll just make sure I read that all correct. So we have a health questionnaire already. Quite a few say they have diabetes, they're living with key workers, they have childcare commitments. So if we bring back so many, and by the other similar businesses in the area, they're surviving on fewer staff, how do you make redundancies without looking unfair to those who haven't been furloughed?
So obviously you wouldn't be able to make redundancies based on their individual health condition. So sorry, what is the question? Can you just repeat that, sorry, for me, Dan?
Yeah, sorry, I think I may have butchered that, to be honest. So we have a health questionnaire already. Quite a few say they have diabetes, they're living with key workers, we have childcare. So if we bring back so many, so I think maybe the question as well, how do you make redundancies without looking unfair to those that have been furloughed?
I see. Yeah, so basically you can't distinguish when it comes to making redundancies between those who are on furlough and those who aren't on furlough. So if for example, 5 people with a sales manager role say that they can't come back, and another 5 people with the same role say that they can come back, you can't then just make a decision to put those who have stayed at home at risk of redundancy. So you'd have to put them all in the same pool. So basically the furlough situation wouldn't change the redundancy process. So you couldn't base it on that. So if anybody's got similar roles, you'd need to put them all in the pool, whether they were on furlough or not.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions that we have for now.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for listening, anybody. And obviously, if anybody else has any other questions, if you just send them through to help@highperformanceconsultancy.com, we can assist you further. And hopefully we'll have an update, further update on the 12th of June that we can share with you as well. Okay, take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.